Hello again, fellow Mystery Files. Today I finished my two-part ranking of every Anthony Berkeley Cox mystery novel with the top half, the top nine. And these books are fantastic. I think each of these nine books do something spectacular, and I'll get into this. Fair warning, there are spoilers ahead, and unlike part one, I do spoil some solutions in this video, but I will give warning beforehand. I've heard back from a number of listeners about spoilers and how I don't really keep them to a minimum as hard as I try, and that's a fair criticism, so I will try harder to give warning this time around. Starting off at number nine is a Roger Sheringham novel, and this is the Berkeley novel that I think most resembles a Christie novel, and that is Top Story Murder, which is sort of the inverse of Murder in the Basement. Our victim here is an elderly woman, Adelaide Barnett, who we later find out is 48 years old, and she is murdered via strangulation, probably with a string of rosary beads. At first appearance, this case looks like a burglary gone wrong. Miss Barnett was notably very frugal, so she did have a lot of money in her flat, like under her mattress or wherever. This book is often described as a turning point in the Sheringham series, as is this is the novel where Roger becomes less misogynistic, and I strongly disagree with this. I think he's just as bad here as he was in the previous ones. He hires the victim's niece Stella to be his secretary and completely mistreats her, although Stella does give it back to him. They have this weird, almost cat and mouse like game going on where Roger seemingly makes passes at her in unflattering ways. There's initially a very hilarious scene where Roger takes Stella to a dress shop because he's looking into a woman who works there and who also lives below the victim. Roger wants to see if this woman is desperate to murder and if she has a breaking point, so he and Stella act extremely rudely toward her. But then it gets, a little icky here where Roger pushes Stella to have the woman model lingerie for her, and the woman is clearly uncomfortable. She's like an older woman and she's not very well off, and she has to be nice because she really needs the job because she's so desperate for money and that she has no other choice but to do this. And it's very uncomfortable. It's not funny or hilarious like it's meant to be. But the best thing about this book is the dynamic between Roger and Inspector Moresby. Moresby is livid with Roger in this one. Moresby is investigating the murder, and he sees the trademarks of a repeat criminal, but Roger just gets in his way and insists there is something else going on here. The burglary was probably faked because the rosary was left behind, and the timeline of events seems a little off. And now I am going to spoil now, so skip ahead to number eight if you don't want this book spoiled, but Moresby is correct here. There is nothing else going on in this book. This was a robbery gone wrong. The murderer is a career burglar. And normally this would bother me. No one wants this kind of story in a Golden Age murder mystery, but Barkley pulls this off brilliantly. This is essentially a different version of Christie's double bluff. The double bluff being, essentially incriminating the guilty party. And everything really is as what it initially seemed to be. Here, it's exactly that, initially what it seemed to be. We have so many brilliant clues to this as well, where Moresby even tells us the criminal has like very small hands and is known to dress as a woman. So when Roger introduces the murderer dressed as a nun, you can solve this despite barely knowing the criminal. I mean, the career criminal in here, his name is the Kid, I believe. He's barely in this book. I think he appears in like 2 pages. But this book has a fantastic ending where Roger goes on this lengthy summation gathering, accusing Stella of murdering her aunt, and all the clues fit with this theory. However, Roger's interrupted by Moresby calling on the telephone to let him know that, yeah, he caught the criminal and the guy confessed. And Roger, being Roger, pretends his accusation against Stella was simply a joke. And it's like, yeah, okay, sure, Roger, you idiot. But I think this is an underrated gem of a mystery novel, so I have it here at number nine. At number eight, I have another Roger Sheringham novel, and this is one I wanted to place higher, but it has one big issue, and that is Second Shot. This is a very long novel that starts off a bit on the slower side, but boy, does it pick up toward the end. It also seems like a very innocuous story. It is told by Cyril Pinkerton, a guest at a weekend house party who gets caught up in the murder of Eric Davies, whom Cyril hated. And Cyril is the prime suspect for a number of reasons, mostly because he hated Eric, but also because Cyril was playing the murderer in a mystery play in which Eric was the victim. Now, this isn't a unique plot, but it is uniquely told and structured. Cyril calls down Roger, assuring him to not only prove his innocence, but also to make sure no one else is arrested for the murder because Eric was just such a terrible person. He deserved to die, making Eric a real male jerk victim in the Anthony Berkeley Cox series. I still don't think Eric really rises to the level of deserve to be murdered, but it's not as bad as in Jumping Jenny. The issue I have with this book is that it does not play fair, which did make me knock it down a few spots. I probably would have had this book at like number 5, but Cyril tells us that Eric was rudely kicking his legs around when he was supposed to be playing the dead victim. However, Eric was already dead at this point, so we are directly lied to by the narrator, and I'm going to spoil now for the rest of this book segment, but Cyril is the murderer after all and lied to us, even though he claims he doesn't lie. In Cyril's summary, he depicts this as him simply misleading the other characters to obfuscate the time of death, which would have been fine and would have played fair, but that's not actually what happens. Cyril directly states in narration that Eric kicked his legs after he was dead. And this is a problem that frequently pops up when you have a murderer narrator. And this is particularly egregious because Barkley wrote this novel partially in response to the murder of Roger Ackroyd. He was a fierce defender of that book against its critics. And here it uses the same twist, but it doesn't play fair, which was the main, and I would argue, false criticism of Roger Ackroyd. I do have to dock it a few spots because of this flaw. It's really not acceptable. But it does play fair in other aspects, and a little too fair, honestly. I mean, Cyril tells us on the first page he always wanted to write a mystery novel from the point of view of the murderer and then proceeds to tell a murder story. I mean, Roger plays a very minimal role in this book where he naturally gets the case wrong, of course. And I like to think Cyril invited him to investigate because he knew Roger would be terrible and mess it up. I love Second Shot. I really do, but that one issue means I can't place it any higher than here at number 8. Number 7, I have the only novel Barkley wrote under the pseudonym of A. Monmouth Plots, Cicely Disappears, also called The Winteringham Mystery. And I love the beginning of this book and its main character, Stephen Monroe. Stephen was once a wealthy man, but he has fallen considerably and has to take a job as a footman at Winteringham. And he's a terrible footman, and things go from bad to worse when his friends all arrive at Winteringham for a party, and Stephen has to attend to them. This is just a hilarious sequence of events with the guests chumming it up with Stephen, much to the dismay of the butler and the hostess, Lady Susan. However, Lady Susan recognizes Stephen and gives him the money so he can leave his position until he finds a suitable career in a respectable position. I found this a shame because I really enjoyed Stephen's antics as a footman, but anyway, there is also a mystery here, which I'll admit isn't as strong as the last few books I've talked about. Lady Susan's niece, Cicely, disappears during a seance of sorts. We have a traditional parlor game mystery here, which is a lot of fun and a classic of the genre. It's not truly a locked room mystery, but it more or less functions as one. We get a lot of cliche golden era tropes like a secret passage, the parlor game, the big country house, but it is a lot of fun. I mean, this is one of the better cliche mysteries, so to speak. I think this is the most fun Barkley mystery novel. I mean, maybe another one could claim the title, but that one is I have in mind is also not a true mystery. I do think the ending here goes a bit off the rails. It takes a rather strange turn of events, and the solution isn't the most thrilling or satisfying, which is why I don't have it higher on the list. But this one is so much fun. It deserves its place here at number 7. Number 6 is a novel that I don't have any major problems with, but it has a lot of like little issues, and that is The Piccadilly Murder. And this is actually the lowest ranked book to feature the recurring character of Mr. Ambrose Chitterwick, who, besides having a stellar name, is also far more likable than Roger Sheringham. Mr. Chitterwick witnesses a murder in the middle of the Piccadilly Hotel. He clearly witnesses a man poison his elderly aunt, but then doubts sleep into his mind and that maybe things aren't as they initially appeared. This book is a wonderful dive into eyewitness testimony and how fallible it can really be. Initially, this book doesn't have the most interesting premise. We actually witness the murder happen and then get in depth descriptions of what everyone looks like. But piece by piece, this is demolished until Mr. Chitterwick is left wondering what actually happened and what did he witness. Like I said, this book is fantastic. Mr. Chitterwick is at his best in this one. He's competent and humorous. I love the character of the aptly named Miss Ghoul, who is charmingly creepy. The resolution is extremely clever without having to resort to outrageous suspension of belief. It's actually a very simple murder. But like I said, I have a lot of small problems with this book. On their own, they wouldn't amount to anything, but collectively, it is a knock against it. I mean, the biggest issue for me is that, and this gets a little spoilery, but I'm not going to reveal who done it, is that the aunt, who is the murder victim here, seemingly doesn't realize her beloved nephew isn't really her nephew. I mean, Barkley goes to great lengths to emphasize she is half blind and half deaf, but this is her closest living relative whom she loves, knows well, and is sitting literally right next to her. I also think the murderer does some questionable actions, and there are some other issues I have that are minor, but they do add up. And I give Barkley a lot of credit because every time an issue like this pops up, he does attempt to explain it his way out of it, but it's a lot of explaining that needs to be done, and I'm not always fully convinced, but it's nothing major. And this is a fantastic book, deserving of this high position here at number 6. At number 5, and from this point forward, I think the remaining novels are truly superior and, dare I say, iconic entries into the world of detective fiction, even though two of them aren't technically true mystery novels, but these are truly spectacular. These are elite books. And at number 5, I have the final Roger Sheringham novel, Panic Party, also called Mr. Pigeon's Island. I think Dorothy L. Sayers summed this book up best when she called it, quote, that nasty book, unquote, and it is deliciously nasty. This is compared frequently to And Then There Were None, which I can see from a setting and atmospheric standpoint, but plot wise, it is quite a bit different. It was published before And Then There Were None in any case. I think the best comparison is to say this book is takes the best from Christie's Cards on the Table and the best from Niall Marsh's Death and the Dancing Footman. And it was also published before either of those books as well. Mr. Pigeon shipwrecks a group of his friends, including Roger, on an island and tells them that one of them is a murderer and they should, have fun with that. And Roger knows Mr. Pigeon is joking for experimental purposes, but Mr. Pigeon is murdered, so maybe he was correct after all. The characters in this one are spectacular. I think these might actually be the best characters in a Barkley novel, though there is some competition. These are probably definitely the best characters for a Roger Sheringham novel. And as I said in part one, I don't always feel as if the characters come alive in the Sheringhams, but this one is an exception where the comparisons to And Then There Were None come in is with the characters as they start to grow unhinged and lose their minds as the novel progresses. I think everything about this novel is fantastic, but it's only at number 5 because I think the top 4 are just more notable works by Barkley. I didn't mention this yet, but some of these Barkley novels are incredibly difficult to find. I'm not sure if they're out of print or what, but Panic Party was by far the most difficult book to locate. It's not for sale anywhere, like any major bookseller, unless you want to buy like a used copy for hundreds of dollars. I've seen them on like Amazon and eBay for over like $200 or $300. And I'd managed to locate a copy of this book at a used book sale after I rummaged through, who knows how many boxes. And I think I was considered lucky. I think this book is near impossible to find. And to me, that means that this just isn't the audience for this book as I think there should be. This book is spectacular and it was absolutely worth the effort to try to find, but it does finish here at number 5. At number 4, and this is probably the most famous Anthony Berkeley novel, and one I think people might expect to see at number 1, but I have it just off the podium, and it is the highest ranked Roger Sheringham novel, The Poison Chocolates Case. And I debated a lot over this one. My initial instinct was to have this one actually quite a bit lower. My opinion of The Poison Chocolates Case is similar to my opinion of Murder on the Orient Express. If you watch my Poirot ranking videos, you may remember that I have Murder on the Orient Express at number 8, and I got a few comments about how that is just way too low. And even if I were to combine all of the Christie novels into one list, this Murder on the Orient Express would be out of the top 10. And I think that book deserves its iconic status and praise. I think it does so many things well, but it is not the most riveting read, especially on like a second or third read. And when I'm in the mood for a Christie, I never pick up Murder on the Orient Express. That's how I feel about the Poison Chocolates case. It's iconic and deservedly so. It's probably the Barkley novel most well known, and it does so many things extremely well, but just simply not the most exciting book to read. The three books I have above it are all iconic in my eyes, do things extremely well, and are more entertaining reads. This is a fantastic novel, but one I'm never really eager to read again. But let's get into the book itself. We start off with Roger and five other members of his crime detection club discussing what's called the infamous poison chocolates case, in which Mrs. Joan Bendix died after eating chocolate liqueurs laced with nitrobenzene. The chocolates originally belonged to a Sir Eustace Pennyfather, who gave the box to Mr. Bendix, so there's a lot of intrigue of which of these three people was the intended victim. Each of the six members of the detection club are tasked to develop their own theory as to what happened here, and we get six different and equally plausible explanations. Because of the structure of this book, which is similar, though not exact, to something like Five Little Pigs or Dyed in the Wool, we just get info dump after info dump. There is no way for the reader to solve this case using the information provided. Each time a new member delivers their theory, we learn new information, and each theory typically piggybacks off of the previous one. But the readers are not informed of the most important details until Mr. Chitterwick's theory, which is the very last one. The solution, which we can assume is correct, although we never actually get confirmation of this, is fantastic. It's one of the greatest reveals in detective fiction. I love it. And I love the story here, and I love what Barkley does with the structure and format of it, even if it does cause us to have a bunch of info dumps. There is very little action in this book. We do have some short passages of Roger running around being Roger and doing investigations with Moresby, but it doesn't really amount to much. And of course, this is another where Roger is wrong, which happens about half of the time in these books. And we do get confirmation in another book, I believe it's Second Shot, that the murderer actually got away with it. There's a passing reference to the murderer living nearby and clearly not in jail. It's likely they weren't even arrested or even investigated by the police. I could go on and on about this one, but I'll stop here with my pros and my cons of the Poison Chocolates case, which finishes here at number 4. At number 3 is a book I really wanted to put at number 1, but I felt I couldn't because it is not a true mystery novel. There's not even a murder or a crime at all. I guess you could say there is a crime, actually, but here I have Mr. Priestley's Problem, also called The Amateur Crime. And I want to start off by saying it's an absolute crime this book has not been adapted yet. I know Barkley hated adaptations of his work, but this needs to be adapted. It would be so much fun. And I did debate not even including this book on the list, but I felt it was close enough to a mystery novel to warrant a placement. It's sort of a psychological thriller, but not even really that. Our hero here, I guess, is Mr. Priestley, who is a stick in the mud bore, and his friend Doyle teases him about this. And later, Doyle conspires with several other people into tricking Priestley into thinking he committed a murder so they can study the effects of the mind of a murderer without actually killing anybody. And everything goes wrong with this plot. It does work in the sense that Mr. Priestley does think he committed a murder, but a police officer happens to witness the scene and he winds up arresting Mr. Priestley with Laura, but they escaped handcuffed together and they try to hide this from some random landlady who thinks they're newlyweds and she's so happy that these newlyweds want to stay in her guest house. And Doyle and Guy lose track of Mr. Priestley, so they lose their subject, but now they have this other shenanigans going on with the police who are investigating, and they decide to continue with the charade to the officer. Because the dead body wasn't really dead, they make it disappear, and then the neighbor winds up getting involved, and Guy's nephew winds up thinking he's found clues, and everyone is just so knee deep into this humorous ploy. It is so delightful. And we don't actually have any like shrewish women in this one as we normally do. Guy's wife Cynthia is sort of depicted this way, but she becomes the ultimate hero here and she winds up tracking down Mr. Priestley and tells him what is happening. And then they turn the tables on Guy, Doyle, and Dora. And we also have Dora's sister Laura, who has to go into hiding because the neighbor saw her at the crime scene and he hides her in his shed. But then his wife finds her and she leaves him thinking he has a mistress. It becomes such a tangle that Scotland Yard gets called in. And this book is such a delightful mess. And the best part of it is you know exactly what is going to happen next, and when it does, it's just as delightful. The reason why I couldn't put this any higher is because there is no mystery here. The only crimes here are incriminating innocent people and lying to the police, maybe some like false imprisonment type stuff, and I did feel the top spot should belong to actual murder mysteries, so I felt like I couldn't place Mr. Priestley's problem any higher than here at number 3. At number 2 is probably the second most famous Barkley novel, and another one I think many people might have expected to be in the top spot, but I have it here, and that is Malice Aforethought. And this is not a spoiler because we were told this right away, but this book is about a man who wants to murder his wife and his plans to go through with it. Dr. Bickley is a country doctor of somewhat dubious abilities who is fed up with his wife Julia and her nagging and her controlling his life. He never loved her, and it's a marriage of convenience. Dr. Bickley has had numerous affairs, and they never really stuck, but now he falls absolutely smitten with Madeline Cranmere, who is new in town, and he wants a divorce. However, Julia will not give him one because she knows Madeline is just using her husband. It's not a suitable match that she would be willing to break her marriage for. So Dr. Bickley finally decides to murder her after merely mulling it about a bit for the first part of the book. And this is where I'm going to get a bit spoilery, but Dr. Bickley does murder Julia, and we are treated to all of his thoughts. And this is a very clever plan where he induces headaches into Julia and makes her into a morphine addict. It's set up beautifully. But then things go wrong because Dr. Bickley is like Roger Sheringham and can't do anything right. And he learns that Madeline was, in fact, just using him. Julia was right, and Madeline's going to marry Denny Bourne instead, but it's too late because he's already murdered Julia. And we continue with Dr. Bickley after Julia dies with his thoughts, and he is free to do what he wants, but the rumors are swirling, and despite him covering his tracks very well, he is eventually arrested for Julia's murder and he is acquitted. And then we have this excellent twist at the end where he's actually tried for murdering Denny Bourne, who he didn't even mean to kill, but he actually did kill when he tried to murder Madeline with botulism. And I think this book has the best characters of any Barkley work. We are deep in the weeds of so many people's minds in this one. There's this foreboding dread in the book, and even though the opening line tells us exactly what is going to happen, despite the heavy darkness, this book is delightful. I enjoy every word of this book. I love the way Barkley is able to take us through Dr. Bickley's thoughts to the point you're almost rooting for him, even though he's like this terrible, vindictive person. There's so much irony here as well. And this is a classic crime novel. It's not technically a mystery novel because we are told what happens, but it deserves a very high spot here at number 2. And now, finally, for number 1, an unsung marvel of Barkley's works, I have Trial and Error. And this book is masterfully crafted. It is on the longer side, but every word is important and intriguing. Our hero of sorts here is Mr. Todhunter, who has an aneurysm and is dying, so he decides that he will commit a murder. He wants to spare innocent people by removing someone so atrocious from society it's ruining several people's lives. He doesn't care about the consequences because he is dying, so it doesn't matter to him. Although he does wish to remain anonymous because he is a prominent member of society and he doesn't want to bring shame to his family. The beginning of this novel focuses mostly on Mr. Todhunter's thoughts and plans, as he's not even sure how to go about this or who to murder. He initially decides on either Hitler or Mussolini, but then decides to go with someone more personal, someone who is ruining people's lives on an intimate scale. And he settles on Jean Norwood, an actress. And yes, there is misogyny in this decision, although it's not as bad as in some other novels, as Jean Norwood is shown to be an awful person. It is telling, however, that Mr. Todhunter blames Jean for having an affair with the married Mr. Faraway and not Mr. Faraway himself. I think this novel dives so well into human psychology. Mr. Todhunter is fascinating as a character. He's presented as this selfish man. He's going to murder for someone else's sake, but there's also this other piece of him that gets a kick out of it. And the reason he decides to murder Jean Norwood isn't because she is ruining everyone's life, it's because she actually pissed him off at one point, and that's sort of the final straw. And Mr. Todhunter is clearly a bit hypocritical in this. We also have the ending portion, which is some of the best work in detective fiction. It might actually be the best courtroom scene, and I'm getting spoilery again here, but Mr. Todhunter confesses to the murder of Jean Norwood to save an innocent man who is arrested, and absolutely no one believes him. He has to conspire with the wonderfully named Sir Ernest Prettyboy to a private civil trial, which I wasn't exactly sure what this is since I'm not British, and this seems to be like a British thing, but Pretty Boy basically sues Todhunter for murder, and a trial is brought forward. And these scenes are just fantastic. And Mr. Todhunter just has so much fun being arrested and tried and convicted and jailed. He's having a blast of the whole thing, and he becomes something of a celebrity. I absolutely adore this novel. I think it should be more popular than it is, but I think there are one or two issues I have, but they don't take away from the book in the slightest. The bigger one is the way Barkley blocks the scene where Todd Hunter shoots Jean. It's not the best written. I mean, to me, it was very clear, again, spoiler here, that Jean Norwood was already dead by the time Mr. Todhunter shot her. This is not an inverted mystery, folks. Someone murdered Jean before Mr. Todhunter did, and he didn't notice. But this is supposed to come as a surprise to the reader, but to me, it didn't. It still made for a wonderful novel because I kept thinking of like who did it, then which does come as a surprise at the end, although it just sort of like thrown in there. We don't get in like an actual real resolution here. And my other issue is there's some casual anti-Semitism in the beginning. The first potential victim Mr. Tonnenter seeks is a newspaper editor who is an awful human being who loves firing people and destroying their families and incomes. And Mr. Todhunter considers him, and then when he finds out he's Jewish, that's like what cinches it for him. It's sort of the last straw, and that's not good. And the reason why Mr. Todhunter doesn't murder this man is because someone else does it before him. But other than those issues, this book is near perfect. It's delightful, heavy on twists and turns, and despite its length, such a breeze to read. So it comes in here at number 1. And that's it for this video. Make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. Next week, I will begin a two-part series discussing S.S. Van Dyne's 20 Rules of Detective Fiction. I'll give my thoughts on them and provide some examples, so stay tuned for that. Until next time, Mystery Files.